Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster automatic battery disconnect on our 2016 GMC Sierra 1500. Now, whenever you want to tow your GMC, if you look in your owner's manual, it is going to say it's required that you remove the battery or you disconnect it. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally don't want to have to open the hood every time that I want to tow my Sierra. Get my tools out, disconnect the battery, and then isolate the cable so I don't have to worry about it arcing on something. Get to where I'm going. Then I'm going to have to get back underneath the hood with my tools, re-hook up my battery so I can drive my truck. Well, our automatic battery disconnect is going to be just that. It's going to be an automatic disconnection, so we're not going to have to do all those steps. We can simply just push a button. Keep in mind, this is only going to be one component for a complete safe flat tow setup for your Sierra. For our Sierra, we're going to need a base plate, a tow bar, safety cables, tow bar wiring, and a braking system. In our Sierra, we have our button mounted here at the bottom of the dash. That way it's nice and out of the way. But you can see if I put my key in, we hear the truck giving us the alarm. It'll start up. We know we have power. I'll go ahead and turn it off. Make sure everything's off. I'll hit that button. You can actually hear that audible click. And then now we can see that I'm not getting any power at all. Go ahead and turn it back on. We'll hear that click again. And now we can see the radio, dash, everything's still coming on. So it's going to be a lot easier just to push that button than having to go underneath the hood. Now if we come underneath the hood, we'll find our solenoid. Now the solenoid is what's actually going to be switching the power on and off from our switch. It is a marine grade solenoid, so it'll have a corrosion resistant casing on it. And it is going to have a 200 amp constant duty and a 600 amp surge cycle to it. It's going to work with most 12 volt systems, and it is going to come pre-assembled, so we're not going to have to worry about putting all the cables and anything in place. Now what I really like about it is the Roadmaster went the extra mile and they labeled everything extremely well. It's nearly impossible to hook this up backwards just because it's going to tell you exactly where to hook it up. Now one thing you do want to keep in mind is whenever you disconnect the battery on any vehicle, you are going to lose some memory. You may have to reset your radio presets or maybe the position of your seat, but anytime you do that, regardless if it's a switch or just disconnecting the cables, you are going to have to reset all those things. Now, as far as the installation goes, again, it is really straightforward, but some customers may be a little bit nervous about disconnecting their battery and tying into any kind of electrical systems. But rest assured, we'll give you a few tips and tricks, and let's go ahead and walk through it together. To begin our installation, we want to grab our battery disconnect out of the kit. Now we're going to use this to kind of mock up where we're going to figure out where we're going to mount it, because our cables are going to have to reach the battery, so we do want to put it somewhat close. So if we look against the firewall here, we have a nice open spot right underneath this wire loom. That's a good spot that we can mount our battery disconnect. And we have two spots on this angled piece here that will put some self-tapping screws right into the firewall. But we're not going to want the cables pointing straight down. Kind of want them to come up and out a little bit. So we're going to need to make a few adjustments on how the cables are routed. Now whenever you do this, you want to make sure we're going to loosen up the silver nut on the outside, but we do not want that gold one to move at all. So you want to make sure that you grab a 1/2 inch wrench. We're going to hold the nut still while we loosen up the outer one. And again, you don't want to move that inner nut, because if you do, it'll cause damage to the inside of the solenoid, which potentially could destroy the connection on the inside. So we'll just loosen up the outer one, and then we're going to pivot our cables about where we want them. And once we get them to the general area of the angle of everything we want, we'll hold the nut on the inside again, and then we'll just tighten up the outer nut. We'll make the adjustments to the other side the same way. So we got ours positioned against the firewall here. I'm just going to take a paint marker. I'm going to mark out the slots of where we need to attach our bracket to. And then I'll come back and I'm going to drill out the holes with a pilot bit just to get them started. and then I'll use some self-tapping screws to secure the solenoid to the firewall. Now once you have your solenoid mounted, we're going to get access to all the battery cables and the battery itself. Now we have this bar that's in the way, so we're going to have to remove it. So we're going to want to pull these 3 bolts holding it out. So we'll grab a 13mm socket and start removing them. For now, we'll set this aside. Then we'll open up the positive post on our battery, lift up the cover, as well as the cover that's right next to it. Just want to lift up, we'll pull the covers and set them aside. Now if we look at our battery, we're going to have a cable attached directly to it, and this very short cable that's going over to this post right here. We're going to need to remove the one off of the post, but we can leave the one directly connected to the battery post here. So we'll grab a 15mm socket and remove the nut. We can grab our cable and we'll slide it off the end, and for now we're just going to move it out of the way. Before we get too much further, we want to move to the negative post of our battery, and we want to disconnect that from the battery itself so we don't have to worry about any kind of arcing. So we'll grab a 10mm socket, we're going to loosen up the nut. Now you don't need to fully remove it, you just want to loosen it up enough that the terminal is going to be loose, and we'll pull it off the negative post of our battery and make sure that it's away from any metal. So we're going to start with our battery cable that's labeled battery cable, and we're going to kind of just tuck it down, and we're going to route it directly to the post that the battery cable was on. We'll slide it over the end, then we'll take the nut that we've previously removed and we'll reinstall it. Then we'll take that 15mm socket and tighten it back up. Then we're going to grab our cable labeled battery post. Our kit's going to have some heat shrink in it. You want to make sure you slide this over the end of the cable. We're just going to push it out of the way for now. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to route this cable so that it can meet up with the short cable that's directly on our battery post. Now, because it's going towards all the other terminals, we don't want it arcing or causing any kind of shorts or anything, so I'm actually going to clock the terminal differently so I can route my cable further away from all the metal in here. So we just want to grab a 10mm socket and we can loosen it up right here. I'm just going to turn my cable so it comes out away from the battery box over here and then tighten it back up. We can take our cable labeled battery post. We're going to grab the small bolt out of our kit. We'll pass it through. We're going to follow that up with a star washer going over the bolt. And we want it to pass through our other cable. We'll grab another star washer, go over the end of it, and then we're going to secure it down with a hex nut. So that way both cables are connected together, and we have the star washer in between the cables and underneath the nut. Now it's very important that you put this heat shrink on before you tighten everything up, because we won't have a way to slide it over once we make our connection. Then use a 1/2" wrench and socket and we'll tighten up that bolt. You just want to slide your heat shrink over the metal connection part. You want to make sure it's covering all metal components so you don't have to worry about any kind of arcing. Then I will come back and I'm going to shrink it down with the heat gun. If you are going to use an open flame like a torch or a lighter, just want to be extremely careful not to burn or char the heat shrink or the cables themselves. Now we're going to have a white wire that's coming off of our solenoid as well, and this is going to be our ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just route it over towards the passenger side. I'm going to go underneath all these cables. And the style of terminal we have on the end of our battery here isn't going to be really good to put a ring terminal on, because that's what actually clamps our battery to the post. So instead, I'm going to estimate about how much wire I need. I'm going to trim back the excess. I'll strip back the end of my wire. Then I'm going to take the ring terminal that comes in our kit, slide it over the end of my wire. I'll crimp it in place. Then we can take the included self-tapping screw and we can go right into the firewall and have a really good solid ground connection. I'm going to use a 5/16 nut driver to put in the self-tapping screw. I'm actually going to get my hole started before I put ring terminal in place. Once we have the hole started, I'll pull the screw out, put my ring terminal around it, and then make sure it goes all the way in. Now we're going to have this long gray wire left. Now if we look at the end of it, if we look very close, there's going to be two wires on the inside of there, a black one and a red one. Now these are going to be going to our switch that we need to mount inside the cab of our truck. So we're going to be using an existing grommet in the firewall to pass our wire through. So we'll go ahead and run this into the inside and we'll show you how we got it there. So I ran my wire across the firewall, just zip tying it in place to some existing wiring until I got all the way over to the driver's side corner by the firewall. Now if we look at the firewall really close, we'll have this very large grommet. Now we use that, we cut a hole in it, and we used an airline tube to pass it through to the inside so we could reach the grommet inside the cab. Now whenever you do that, you do want to be extremely careful because there are a lot of wires going through there. So you just want to make a small cut at the very top so you can stay away from the wires as much as possible. And then what I did was I took a screwdriver and poked it all the way through to the inside. That way I could feed my airline tube through. And then I took my wire and attached it to my airline tube, and now we'll pull it in and pull all the slack to the inside. So just start pulling on our airline tube until our wire comes through, and we can pull all the slack to the inside. It's not a bad idea to double check the outside, make sure there's not a wad of wire hanging out. But once we have all the slack inside, then we can find a general spot that we want to mount up our switch. So here's what our switch is going to look like. Now we want to find a nice solid flat surface that we can mount this switch to that's going to be out of the way and also where nobody's going to accidentally push it. So we're going to be mounting ours at the bottom of the dash here, just to the inside or towards the center of our truck from where our hood release is. Now it's not a bad idea to reach underneath and feel, make sure there's no wires or no other obstructions behind the panel because we are going to have to drill a hole. Now we're going to be drilling a 5/8 hole, so I have myself a 5/8 bit. If you don't have a 5/8 bit, what you can do is you can drill a smaller hole and then enlarge it using a step bit. But a 5/8 is going to be the correct size. That's going to fit the switch nicely and make sure it's not too loose. So we're just going to find a nice spot, make sure there's nothing behind our dash, and drill our hole. We can go back and clean up all the edges and get that loose plastic off. And you want to take the end of your wire, will come from behind where we drilled, and we're going to pass our wires through. You want to pull all the slack out. Now we're going to go ahead and cut this. It's a good idea to leave yourself a little bit of room so you're not trying to work right at the hole. And we can always tie up the excess underneath the dash later, but there's no need for this much extra wire, so we'll cut it right about here to give us plenty of room to work with. Now we're going to want to strip back the gray outer coating. You want to strip back a good amount so we can get access to the two wires on the inside, and so we have enough to work with on those each. Now we're going to strip back each one of the small wires inside as well. So we'll grab our switch, we're going to remove that nut off the back of it. Now this needs to be on the back side of the panel. So we're going to take our wires out, we'll pull them through, back through the hole. We're going to make sure the nut goes around the wires. And right now we're just going to leave it in the back side, just kind of hanging out. And we'll put our wires back through. And then we can loosen up the terminals that are on the back using a Phillips screwdriver. It's extremely small screws, so you don't want to pull it out all the way, but you want to loosen it up enough so there's room to get that wire inside, and then we'll tighten it up. And each wire is going to go into one side of the terminal. It doesn't matter which one, you just don't want them touching each other. Slide the wire in, make sure that only the copper is inside that terminal, and then we'll tighten it up. We'll do the same thing for the black wire. Now that our wires are attached, we want to push our switch so that it's going to sit flush inside the dash where we drilled the hole. And then you want to reach onto the back side and you want to tighten that nut up. You don't really need to crank down on it that hard. You just want it to where the switch isn't going to move or come out. So we just reach behind, tighten it up with our hands, make sure it's not going to go anywhere. Now one final step we have is to put the fuse in place. So we'll open up the fuse cover that's right by our solenoid, and we'll grab the 7.5 amp fuse. We can put it in place, close up the cover. And now would be a good time to clean up all of your wires, put the covers back on your battery, as well as putting that support bar back in place. The final step of our installation is going to be testing everything so it works properly. Now obviously we have power, my lights are on in the dash, the radio's going, and I got an alarm going off in my truck. I take the key out, turn my headlights out, and I push the button. We can see that my dome light went out, and if I put the key back in, I'm not getting any power at all. It's going to be a lot easier to flip that switch than to go underneath the hood and disconnect the battery. But that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster automatic battery disconnect on our 2016 GMC Sierra 1500.